Now for our politics panel, we're joined by Susan Page, USA Today's Washington bureau chief. Ron Brownstein is editorial director at Atlantic Media. Michael Duffy is the deputy editor of Time. And Ed O'Keefe covers politics for the Washington Post. Susan, let's start with the Republicans. Donald Trump's wild ride of a week. Where are we now that it's Sunday and the dust is cleared? What's real? What's just a shiny object?
Well, one thing we know is we've had a series of polls both nationwide and in some key states, and they all show movement toward the Democrats. They all show bad news for Republicans coming out of their convention. Now, on the other hand, Donald Trump in like the past 48 hours has shown a more disciplined campaign. He basically acknowledged he had made a mistake in saying he had seen that money offloaded in Iran. He finally endorsed the Speaker of the House. That seemed surprisingly slow in coming. I guess the question is, can he keep up that kind of campaign for 3 months or even for another week?
Michael, what is the nature? I mean, Republicans have been worried before about Donald Trump. We kind of have come to this. Was there something different about this week? Give us a sense of what the nature of the nervousness is about him that might be new.
This was the week, John, where Donald Trump himself made Donald Trump's fitness to be commander-in-chief the central issue of the campaign. That's the change. And he did it in a kind of triple blunder. He attacked a Gold Star family when coming out of his convention he could have been magnanimous, and when gratitude was clearly the order of the day. Instead of talking about he was talking about that instead of talking about the economy, which he'd been given a good number on for him at least, the growth in the first half had been less than 1%. That was a good topic for him if you're going to be campaigning in Ohio and Pennsylvania. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking about the Khan family. And then third, I think the worst of it is that if you're in August and you're having an argument with the country about your fitness to be president, you're probably losing it.
And Ed, the Trump campaign has said the bar here, if it's a changed election, is really that fitness question. They've said, I mean, obviously the Democrats are trying to get everybody to talk about fitness. That's their game plan. But the Trump campaign has also said, if he can convince people he's fit enough to be president, because it's a changed election, that's all he has to do.
And he's not doing it. 6 in 10 not qualified in our poll that's out this morning. 3 in 10 would be uncomfortable if he becomes president. Look at what Jeff Flake told you. He might lose Arizona. John Kasich this morning saying he might lose Ohio. There's no confidence for him across his party and in all this polling. And I think, if this sustains itself through Labor Day, I've been reminded by senior Republicans that is the point at which they will probably start making the checks and balances argument. They try to do what they did in 1996, where you
Explain to people what that means.
Well, it's the idea that we kind of acknowledge that our Republican presidential candidate has no hope, but you need a Republican Congress to be the check and the balance on a Democratic president. It worked in 1996 for them. And I think they look at the numbers now and they think if this continues through Labor Day, once people start worrying about the presidential election, it might be something they have to do.
In 1996,
as we were talking about before, I mean, there's a lot of structure in this race. You mentioned 60% in that ABC Washington Post poll said that he's not qualified to be president. The total variation in all the times they've asked that question has been between 58 saying he isn't and 61% saying he isn't. That's it. It's been that way for a year and a half. On the other hand, the one big advantage Donald Trump consistently has is that people see him as more likely to bring change to Washington, right? So if he can stay on that terrain, he's in a stronger position. But the underlying structure, what we talked about before, we see in Virginia, you look at this race, Donald Trump is going to do very well with blue-collar white voters. He is going to face probably the biggest deficit any Republican has, I think, among non-white voters. He could lose 84, 85% of them, which would be more than we have seen in modern times. The pivot of this race, the piece that is the most movable, are these college-educated white voters who tend to be socially moderate, but most of them lean toward a smaller government argument. When he gives his speech tomorrow on kind of the economy, and he kind of wraps himself in traditional Republican arguments about taxes and regulation, he may move back some of those college white men who are now where he is significantly underperforming. But as long as the percentage of those voters who now think that he is not qualified and who think that he is racially divisive is a hit, those are the twin towers in the way blocking him to the White House.
Susan, let me ask you just before. Can a candidate fix the temperament question in a campaign? Hillary Clinton there's also the question with her, can you fix the trust? How do you show trust in a campaign? So can you do that? Can you show temperament? Is there something that can be done by Donald Trump to fix the worries that we've been talking about?
I think as long as the referendum is on them, they each lose, right? Each of these candidates need the referendum to be on the other guy. You mentioned the underlying structure as being very important. Of course, that's true. Moments matter too. And I remember in convention moments, 1988, speech that George H.W. Bush did made a difference. In 2012, the convention speech that Barack Obama made by Bill Clinton made for Barack Obama made a difference. And in these two conventions, the speech that I think made the most difference was that by Mr. and Mrs. Khan.
Yeah.
Two people I'd never heard of before they got out on that convention stage at the Democratic convention, but both the kind of reality, the authenticity, the emotion of their speech and his response to it, that is what has crystallized, I think, concerns about him. You know, there'll be a lot of twists and turns in this election. I think it's possible we look back on this election and that turns out to be a turning point.
I think
It's yes, exactly. Curiel and
is
the Khans.
turning point.
I spent a lot of time talking to Hispanic operatives, Hispanic voters, Hispanic politicians. You hear from African Americans as well. Maybe other candidates can fix the temperament question. He will not be able to do it unless every single day between now and election day he goes out there and says, mea culpa, lo siento, you know, I'm sorry I did this, I'm never going to do that again, because absent that, it just won't resonate. He has no hope of it.
Let's take a look at, John McCain was asked the temperament question this week and had some difficulty answering it, which also I think contributes to this question. Let's take a look at McCain and we'll talk about it.
Are you comfortable with Donald Trump possibly having control of the nuclear arsenal?
Anyone that the people of this country choose to be the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States, therefore, can lead this country and will lead in a responsible fashion anyone who is elected president fairly of this country. And that's the way that our democratic system works. That's the way our government works. The American people select the next president of the United States knowing full well what the role of the commander-in-chief is. Therefore, I have the utmost respect for the verdict of the people.
Yeah. That was not exactly a straight-up answer of the kind Senator Cotton gave. Senator Cotton said it would be okay, but then he also added, but Congress will be there as a check. What did you make of that, Michael?
Well, there are moments that matter, and it wasn't. What was so interesting about this week is it wasn't just the Khan family moment. You had the extraordinary moment also this week where Donald Trump said that the race is rigged.
Yeah.
And that raises a whole other question about not just temperament, but judgment in our political life. Now, rigged is a word that's been thrown around this campaign a lot by lots of politicians about our tax system, our trade system, you know, how the economy benefits some and not others. But what Trump did was put the actual manner of voting and choosing our elections on the table and said it's broken and it's corrupt. And he's either doing one of two things here. He's either laying the predicate for his own failure,
right,
which is a very interesting thing to contemplate in mid-August, or he's setting the table for saying later that the outcome is illegitimate. Now this puts like the nuclear codes or whatever McCain was talking about there, this puts a whole other set of verities about this election on the table for voters that do go to temperament. Is this the kind of person or not that you want to have? So I think, you know, don't forget we've had peaceful transfer of power for 200 and some years. It's the longest in human history. It's not a small thing that he tabled there.
Couldn't it also be a turnout mechanism, which is the other side is trying everything to undermine me. Anything that's bad that you see is only the result of chicanery from someone else. So you all on my side better turn out.
It feels at every critical moment he chooses to narrow and deepen rather than broaden. It is an argument that appeals to the alienated voters who believe that they are both culturally and economically marginalized and are being ignored by a political system that is in control of moneyed interests and elites. But if you believe, as I do, that the pivot, the fulcrum of this election are these white-collar white voters who normally lean Republican. Mitt Romney won them by 14 points in the exit poll. Hillary Clinton is now ahead in both the ABC Post and NBC Wall Street Journal. She's ahead. For those kind of voters, hearing him talking about a rigged election is again more evidence that this is someone who is maybe a little too erratic to put in the Oval Office. So again, I mean, the Trump theory seems to be that they're going to turn out this massive non-voting, non-traditional voters. Maybe they will, but they are looking at structural problems with two big blocks. By the way, if you add up the minorities and the college whites, where he's struggling the most, depending on the data source you use, that's either 60 or 65% of all the voters.
And what a dilemma for the Republican Party coming out of this election, with that as the base of their electorate. Could John McCain have looked any more uncomfortable?
Well,
and what about when Jeff Flake said to you, I still hope to vote for Donald Trump? Really? Doesn't sound like a man who wants to vote for Donald Trump. Ed and I were talking in the green room. That's all about the dilemma that Republicans face in looking at primary challenges
in 2018 and in governing next year. And I think the point about McCain, we should remind the viewers who may wonder why he stammered through that. He has a primary this month. He's facing a legitimate threat. He's one of 8 senators who has a primary this month. 68 House Republicans face a primary this month. One of them lost this week, was an isolated case. Ask that question of him and others in a month when they're through their primaries, and I suspect that the question
Can I add one
will
quick
be
thing
more
here?
clearly answered.
Up until now, the biggest modern fissure in the Republican Party over a presidential race was Barry Goldwater in 1964. Lyndon Johnson was able to announce a National Independence Committee for Johnson and Humphrey in early September. It had a lot of former Eisenhower cabinet officials. It had a lot of big business leaders. But what it didn't have was as many current elected officials expressing resistance and reluctance to vote, even compared to Goldwater in 64. I mean, there were a few. There was Jacob Javits and Keating in New York, John Lindsay. But what we are seeing now
All
from Jeff
Northeast
Flake,
Republican,
a few Northeast
moderate
Republicans,
types.
but what we are seeing now in the long list of John Kasich and Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush and Jeff Flake and the congressman in Virginia who said he's going to vote Libertarian, that goes beyond. And again, if you are that kind of swing suburban voter who usually votes Republican, because you like the Republicans on economics, they are getting a consistent signal. I'd add Mike Bloomberg as an important speech from the convention. They are getting a consistent signal that this may be a year when it's okay to depart from your usual inclination.
Duffy.
You mentioned just some interesting numbers in there. One of the most interesting polls this week came in Georgia, where Hillary Clinton is up in the Atlanta Constitution poll by 1 point. And Democrats have not won Georgia since 1992, when Bill Clinton won it. Two interesting things going on there. One is, in that poll, Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, is polling now in double digits. This is quite astonishing. There are only a couple states where that'll happen, Montana, perhaps Alaska, but Georgia. That puts Hillary Clinton in reach. It's not absolute by any means guaranteed, because of the plug for the third-party candidate, which is how Clinton, her husband, won in 1992 when Ross Perot got 13%.
You know, the Trump campaign has talked about we're going to run in 20 states, which sounds complicated and like they're putting new states on the map for themselves. But right now with Arizona and Georgia, the states that are coming on and in contention, even if they're not seriously, you got to spend a little time there, are going the other way. There are states where Clinton shouldn't be competitive.
Chiefly
but
because
is.
Go ahead.
Quickly, give us a sense of how many days are left and how you can possibly compete in that many different states if you're the Trump campaign.
Exactly 92 days are left, and in some that looks like a long time, and it is. It's not short. But don't forget, in some states the voting starts in 45 days, 46 days. I think Minnesota. So, which means it's not as long as 96 days. And some of these voting, you can get an early ballot in some states before the debates are over. In some ways, and so that just really changes the fact that this happened this week in mid-August, before as the Olympics get underway and people go on vacation. He's chosen a time when he could have been consolidating, as you said, uniting and broadening his appeal to really making people think again about whether this is a referendum on not on the incumbent for the first time in my memory covering politics, but on the challenger.
But let's remember that Hillary Clinton's lead is largely dependent on voters who don't really like her or trust her.
Right.
So in that sense, the ground is always a little unstable underneath her. You know, those college whites who are so important to why Trump is stuck in the low 40s, a majority of them say they have an unfavorable opinion of Hillary Clinton. So, you know, sleeping easy is still maybe a step too far.
And Susan, once again, Hillary Clinton had trouble with the email question. Why is this such a hard question?
So two confounding questions this week. One, why did Donald Trump engage with the Gold Star family in a negative way? Got me. Two, why can Hillary Clinton practice and then deliver an accurate and clear explanation of her treatment of handling of this email question? And instead, she had another chance this week and her answer was muddy and it was at the least misleading, and I don't understand why that's so.
Quickly, that's another problem to the Donald Trump week, which is that they didn't get to focus on that.
And then they continue to. I mean, the economic growth numbers is one thing. Her email scandal is another. That is what continues to frustrate Republicans so much, is that there's just so much material there for them to be using against her. They can't do it because he continues to do this. I want to make one point about...
We got to go, I'm afraid.
Then
Sorry.
Then we'll
Thanks
leave it
to
at
all
that.
of you, and we'll be right back.